Okay, I think I'm recording. Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I did a little brief short the other day just because I had thoughts that I just had to share at that moment. The angle was unfortunate and lighting not very good, but there you go. Now, I think since the last time I've talked to you guys for a real full video, it was I still had not yet finished this one. So I finished Anglo-Saxon manuscripts, which was quite enjoyable. I think the biggest thing was this one. No, it was the other one, but this was good. This probably wasn't. Oh, I did mention this one because this is the one where I mentioned I had to flip back and forth. So that's was probably my biggest issue with this one was all the flipping back and forth to see the pictures. But I think I mentioned that last video. So let me just throw that over here. Now, with marking the hours, English people and their prayers, I have gotten to the tutor part, so with Thomas More, so I won't continue this book until next quarter. So that's, oops, it's, it looks like half the book. No, it's less than half the book. Even with the footnotes, it's less than half the book. But, yeah, so I'll wait to do the part with the Tudor England and beyond once I get to that point. I did appreciate this author. First of all, I appreciate the footnotes. Unfortunately, I did end up purchasing quite a few books because of the footnotes, so this is a very bad book for my self-control. I enjoy the way that is written. I do like the fact that it went into some of what I mentioned in the last little video that I recorded, some of the way that historians have discussed the Book of Hours and how it represents people's relationship with religion. I really enjoyed how this book has gone into that and then has rebutted some of the misconceptions. One of the misconceptions that I didn't mention in the last video, which I just hadn't happened to reach yet at that point, was it was the same professor, but he had a very harsh way and a very negative way of viewing how people related to the Book of Hours. So he hated the fact that the Psalms were a part of it. He believed it was very me, which, I mean, when you're praying, you are talking to God, and part of it is prayers of supplication, which it could be about others, but it is definitely about you as well when you're praying, because it's a conversation, and sometimes when you're talking to it was just like an odd way of, I mean, has he never asked in prayer for something? Is he not someone who is religious? It's just a kind of odd way of looking at it. And the other thing is he assumed that it was not a general prayer. Like, he assumed that if there was a prayer about dealing with enemies, it was automatically about someone personal, like someone who was maybe a rival in business or something. So the example is that okay, let's see. So he supplies it. Okay, so overall, Richmond, like this other historian's last name is unfortunately Bossy, but nevertheless, overall, Richmond too endorses the charge that late medieval users of Book of Hours did indeed whinge when they prayed. I do love the word whinge, even though I don't care for how the two historians, Richmond and Bossy, choose to use it in relation to medieval prayer. But I do enjoy the word whinge. We need to use that in America more. Anyway, he supplies as an example of prayer from a devotional compendium, not a Book of Hours, but other examples were Book of Hours. So the prayer is, most dear Lord and Savior, sweet Jesus, I beseech thy most courtesy. I'm trying to word it in the Old English style. Most courtesy, goodness, and benign favor to be to me, most wretched creature, favorable Lord, protector, keeper, and defender, in all necessities and needs, be my shield of protection against all my enemies, bodily and ghostly. Merciful Jesus, I have none other trust, hope, and succor but in the only my dear Lord, sweet Jesus, which of thy infinite goodness madest me of not like unto thy most excellent image, and so on. Richmond will then say, Richmond offers a harsh and reductionist view of the rhetorical style of this prayer, speculating that its cringing tone might have had crassly political overtones. Could the mode, he asks, be a particularly upper-class one? The English nobility behaving towards their lord as they wished others to behave towards them, which is just a really odd way of looking at it. It's just really weird to me. Has he not ever opened a book of prayers? Maybe it's because I've grown up Catholic, and to me, this is not an odd prayer. You're talking about spiritual protection, and maybe even, there, things happen in the world. You're actually asking for protection. It's not a dumb or odd or particularly whingy prayer. It's just really odd. It seems almost like the author, maybe those particular historians, perhaps they just don't have experience with even modern religious prayer. It just seems really odd to take that particularly negative view and place it on medieval when really it's not that different. Anyway, he also, let's see, trying to find another part. And they're talking about some of these prayers have been around for centuries, not just medieval. Let's see. Most of these prayers are clerically generated, so to say that this is the late medieval, lay upper class social attitudes is just, again, odd. Let's see. I'm trying to find where he talks about Psalms. Oh, here we go. Despite the conventional character of prayer, he's talking about Richard. So, another Dr. Hughes, another historian, Dr. Hughes, claims that some of the prayers were not only offered a unique insight not only to individualistic and idiosyncratic piety and devotional psychology, but into drastic growth of isolated individualism and aggression, in the prayer life of the late medieval lay people more generally. His argument turns on the fact that the complaint language of many psalms in the standard Book of Hours, including, of course, the one used by Richard III. It was Richard III. Yes, Richard III portrays the speaker as beleaguered by enemies, and there's a corresponding preoccupation with escape from the malice of enemies in the added prayer of Richard III. People using such psalms and prayers, Hugh contends, most certainly have applied them not to spiritual forces, how do you know that, but to their day-to-day enemies and rivals. And it is likely that merchants, in using such prayers, had in mind their competitors, creditors, and craftsmen. Again, it's like prayers of this sort of, these are the Psalms. They are prayers from antiquity. David wrote these prayers. And yes, in Richard's case, some of that might have been, prayers about some of his personal, he might have applied some of that to his personal issues in praying. But to assume that that every craftsman who prayed these prayers, I've prayed some of these Psalms. I'm not sitting there thinking about, gee, protect me from, give me victory over my, I don't know, when I was in nursing, it doesn't even apply for nursing, I don't know, other booktubers. I don't know, it's just like, that's not, these Psalms are prayed today. It doesn't fit that he's taking something that continues to be prayed and then up going, well, even though this continues to be prayed now, in medieval times, this shows that these people were individualistic and, applying these to their competitors, creditors, and craftsmen. It's just like, it's putting a particularly negative view on something that doesn't need to be and doesn't even make sense if you know anything about the way the Psalms have been used through history and to current day. It's they are applied in a spiritual way, and the way Psalms are set up is you'll have the negative part, the prayer of supplication, for the ones that are that are dealing with negative, that have I am beleaguered, that kind of one. They always end in a I thank you, God, or some sort of positive praise. They aren't negative all the way through. They end, every single psalm ends in praise or in thanksgiving or something like that. It's not just a whinge, if they know anything about the Psalms. And yes, that makes sense that Richard might have had a prayer referencing Absalom and Achitophel. I'm not saying that wrong. They're rebelling against King David. It probably felt very applicable to the situation, but yes, some people might. It's normal to apply some of it to your personal life, but doesn't mean that everyone applied every prayer in the Psalms to their personal life. Because then what does that mean? Does that mean that you have the monks who had the Psalms set up? They would go through the majority, if not all, the Psalms during the course of these hours that they were praying every few hours, the Psalms. So they're going to hit some of these Psalms that we're talking about being beleaguered and being, set upon and, having to deal with these enemies, feeling like lost and you need help. That's the monks were going to hit those prayers. So what enemies does he think the monks are talking about? It's going to be spiritual. Yes, they might be thinking sometimes about enemies dealing with the country, everyone, there's going to, it doesn't make sense to just assume that it shows a particularly negative view of medieval prayer. If Hughes' analysis, or any of these other, or Bossy, or Richmond's analysis as accepted of Richard, or Book of Hours generally, offer a horrifying picture of late medieval society as radically dysfunctional, red in tooth and claw, populated by isolated individualists constantly praying against their neighbors. Hugh considers that prayers in the Book of Hours reinforce individuality, emphasizing the close relationship that existed between the worshiper and God, who provides a source of strength against hostility of neighbors, the frustrations of dealing with people, and egocentric and abrasive expression of social hostility. Yeah, some of that, and Duffy mentions, that some of this in the strife-torn world, in the world of the Wars of the Roses, has some plausibility, but that's not all the time, everyone. The argument lacks nuance. Indeed, the sort of account of what Duffy likes to call the voice of the prayer of the late Middle Ages, seems to Duffy in general problematic. Not only is it overwhelming negative characterization of the piety in which the books represented is individualistic, but in what Duffy takes to be simplistic assumptions about the way in which the users of these books appropriate their meaning. And he goes on to say what I was saying. These books of ours were not just prayed privately. First of all, you had the books. A lot of times they would have parts that they could go and join in with. Usually it was either morning prayer or evening prayer, I believe. Key items of the Book of Hours as the Office of the Dead is Vespers, Matins, Lauds of the Dead, or dirge is often known. This service was invariable and popular in future Books of Hours. It was neither simplified or abbreviated, but included the full text of the church's official prayers for the dead. And these prayers could be recited they're meant to be recited with others, as well as alone. So it's just, to give it that particularly like negative individualistic viewpoint is very reductionist. By and large, medieval people did not speak for themselves when they prayed. They articulated their hopes and fears, however deeply felt, in the borrowed words of others, which they made their own in the act of recitation. This is, of course, not a fact only about medieval Christian prayer, but about the whole Christian tradition, since the fundamental Christian prayer book is an ancient Hebrew liturgical anthology, the Psalter, and what was true of the Psalter was true of prayer more generally. The manuscript additions to so many of the surviving Book of Hours show a magpie tendency to seize on good prayers wherever they might be found. It's just... It's really funny how this part kind of heated me up, this particular chapter, because of the three historians that Duffy mentioned that seem to go out of their way to look at medieval prayer in the most negative way they possibly could, which to me is a completely terrible way to go at a historical topic. If you're going to talk about something like medieval prayer or something that was very important to the medieval people, well, like a different book that I read about how the Irish saved civilization. Yeah, I believe that's what it's called. The author in that book was very dismissive about why figuring out the date of Easter was so important to medieval people. He basically said it was silly. But you fail to then truly get into the mind of your subject. And if you can't get yourself into the mind of the medieval person, if you instead stand back in judgment, you're honestly a poor historian. It's important to understand the people in their time, instead of just looking from a modern point of view, and from particularly a point of view that appears to be not understanding Christianity at all, to not look at, you're going to be studying Christian prayer, and you are going to be judging. It just seems odd to do so in the way that these authors are doing if it seems that they don't understand Christian prayer at all. I'm reading a different book where the author mentions that they grew up Catholic, but they fell away from the faith later. I think he called himself an apostate. But he made a point of saying that you need to get into the mind of the people that are praying at that time period kind of feel, as he described it, as he said the magic, but he didn't mean like magic. The magic that and the hold that these prayers had on the people of the time. That's really the way to look at studying anything that's important to a time period. If you go into studying antiquity and you just say people's devotion to X god was just silly, well, that's just a very judgmental and reductionist way of looking at the people of the time, and it just limits your ability to tell that story. To why are you studying history if not to understand the people of that time? To study history just to stand in judgment of history. It just seems odd. Yes, there are points where you can say we don't want to repeat those mistakes, but if you're studying people's mindsets and how they live their daily lives, their religious lives, the things that were important to them, why waste your time if you're just going to be judging and saying that these are basically horrible people because you don't understand how you don't bother to look at the history of Christian prayer and the continuance of Christian prayer and just look at it in isolation and say, well, this means that they were just, vindictive people who were praying against their competitors, obviously. I don't know. It just heated me up, as you can tell. Thankfully, Duffy, I think, provides a very reasonable and logical defense. I read probably more of it than I needed to out loud, but I would recommend reading the full. Honestly, I'm only a little more than halfway through the book because I'm waiting to read the Tudor part, which should be interesting because then we'll be hitting the Reformation. I'm not surprised that this section is shorter because I would imagine the use of the Book of Hours was probably going down and they would move to other prayer books because a good portion of the Book of Hours was the Little Office of the Blessed Virgin. And I believe, if I recall correctly, devotion to the Blessed Virgin got to the point where it was discouraged. So if it was discouraged, you do lose a huge part of the Book of Hours. So I'm not surprised this section is shorter. I did find it interesting, and then I'll close my rant on this book, where Duffy mentions that when you look at pages where people are writing, this is a gift to my assured friend. Okay, so here, in this particular book, Queen Catherine of Aragon has written, I think the prayers of a friend the most acceptable unto God, because I take you for one of mine assured. I pray you to remember me and yours, Catherine the Queen. And at the end of the book, Princess Mary wrote, I have read that nobody lives as he should do, but he that followeth virtue, and in reckoning you to be one of them, I pray you to remember me in your devotions. So I'm trying to translate it again because they're doing the Old English thing. So both of they wrote in the book, as hey, this is a gift for a assured friend. Now, as kind of a sad example of what would happen to a lot of these Book of Hours as Henry VIII took over and there was a split over Henry's great matter. It says, a part of the heartlessness of Tudor history, it is a part of the heartlessness of Tudor history, the signatures and titles of both Catherine and Mary, the court ladies' assured friends, have been carefully and ruthlessly blotted out. And it was just, that is kind of sad. And in other points, they mentioned that people are blotting out anything to do with the Pope or anything like that. It's this is the defacement of the books that the author talks about at the beginning of the book in the introduction. But yeah, I mostly wanted to rant about why do historians bother covering an era if they are not going to try to really understand the era. But anywho, I'm sure I was very repetitive in that. Well, I probably should stop this video and make anything else I have to say in a second video. Thank you very much for joining me. If you managed to make it through that rant, I appreciate that. I know that that was very heavy, religious, but I'm talking about Book of Hours, and I do have a personal connection to that because of the fact that Liturgy Hours does have some of the aspects of a Book of Hours because of the Psalter part. It's not exactly the same because the Book of Hours was a mixture of things, but it's enough the same. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me. I will see you in the next video. God bless. Bye.